Good evening. The report out.
Hey, good morning, everybody. Good morning. Glad you should be more awake. This is the 10:30 service. Come on. Hey, glad you're here today. Man, doesn't our worship team just do amazing? Aren't they fantastic, man? And hey, what you didn't know is that last night, Tabby, who is our worship leader, she actually had a baby 6 weeks ahead of schedule. And little baby Finley is 4 pounds, 13 ounces. Grandpa's right there. He's excited. And what? 314. Wow, he's a little bitty baby. But baby is doing great. Baby and mama are both doing awesome. And so, man, we just need to praise God for that, right? Come on. Grandpa's not excited at all. I'm glad that you are here today. I have been very excited. In fact, I was so excited last night about this message that I could hardly fall asleep. And so I really believe that what we're going to learn about today is going to be very, very important for a lot of our lives. And if you are just joining us for the first time, we're in a series going through the book of Daniel. And really what we're talking about is how we live a godly life in a very ungodly age. Anybody turn on the news this week? You would probably, if you did, you would say, yes, we are living in a very ungodly age. Every time we look at the news, every time we look at Facebook or whatever, it just seems like things are getting worse and worse and progressively worse with our country, with our nation, with the world. And so this is something that we've got to know about. We have to know how do we live godly lives in the midst of an ungodly age. And last week, if you were with us, we started in Daniel chapter 1, and we were introduced to our main characters, Daniel and his 3 friends who were renamed Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. And what they did was they were willing to take a stand to the king for what they believed. And really our big takeaway from last week is the biggest thing that set Daniel apart was he made a predetermined decision about where he would not compromise. And that way, when he was faced with the king's food that was dedicated to pagan gods, he was like, well, no, I've already determined that I'm not going to do that. So we just talked about how one small compromise now can lead to a full-scale rebellion later on. And so that was the takeaway from last week. If you weren't here, I think it's worth listening to, not because I'm good, but because the word is good. And you can find that on our YouTube channel. And today, we're going to see that, what we talked about last week, that predetermined decision, we're actually going to see that put into practice, not in Daniel's life. Daniel's not in this story this morning, but we're going to see it put into practice by those 3 friends, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. And again, these boys are very, very young. I mean, these aren't like, out of seminary, adult, believers. These kids are like 14, 15, 16 years old. They have been captured. They've been taken into slavery, essentially. Their whole lives were rocked. And so we see these young boys, these young men, and they're going to make a stand for what they believe. And they're going to be willing to put their lives on the line for that belief, which is pretty impressive because a lot of us would say, I don't know that I can hardly stand for what I believe on a minor level. Like, I might get made fun of at work or school, so I don't pray or read my Bible. These guys were getting ready to face something that was absolutely going to rock their world. And this is going to be like what we're learning about. This is a bad day for them. Now, how many of you have had a bad day recently? Bad day. Oh, look at all you perfect people. Man, I'm so glad your lives are awesome, wonderful. Scott, I see you over there. Life's going great. Well, I've had a bad day recently. Some of us have had bad days. You might be like, I've had a horrible season. This has been a terrible month. 2017 needs to go away. Like, it's just been rough. So we all have bad days. And some of us do different things when we have bad days. Like maybe some of you are like me, and if I'm having a really bad day, what I like to do? I like to get a pizza from Casey's. pepperoni because I'm boring. And it's glorious and amazing. So you might just be like, well, I had a bad day, so I'm going to eat, and it's going to make me sick because Casey's does, but I don't care. I'm going to eat it anyway. Some of you, also like me, might like to say, well, when I'm having a bad day, I just want to binge watch Netflix, get lost in another reality because, my life's pretty terrible right now. Maybe some of you, if you're like me also, I don't have that many bad days, but I've got things I do. Maybe you're just like, I just got to take a nap. Like, I got to get off social media. I just got to disconnect because I hate everyone right now. Now, one thing I want to get serious for a moment. I hope you know that as a pastor, I strive to be transparent all the time. And I don't want to put on an impression to you that I'm someone that I'm not, because I'm not perfect. And I mess up and make mistakes, and I have really bad days. And when we have a bad day, you have two choices. You can give up or you can get up. When you have a bad day, you can give up or get up. Now, I like pizza and I like Netflix, but when I'm having a really bad day, I love to take a bath. I'm going to be honest. I love taking baths. Like, my wife's like, you're having a bad day. Do you need me to draw you a bath? And I'm like, extra bubbles, baby. And like, every guy is allowed one girly thing. I don't know what your thing is, but mine is baths and candles. She was like, you want me to light the candles? Do you have to ask? Like, yeah, of course, light the candles. Come on, I'm not an animal. And so, like, it's cool. I'm serious, man. She'll get out like the orange scrub and everything. It's glorious. I love a bath. But anyway, that's my thing. When I'm having a bad day, I just need to sit and simmer and stew in my own filth and just be like, life is filthy and life's horrible. This is what I'm going through. I don't know why I shared that with you. I just felt like I need to be honest. Oh yeah, bad days. We all have bad days. Let's get back on track. And the thing about a bad day or a bad season is they're guaranteed to come. No matter who you are, believer, unbeliever, Christian, non-Christian, doesn't matter. All of us are guaranteed to have bad days, or we're guaranteed to have bad seasons or bad years where, it just seems like the world is really falling apart. And the reality is, many of you this morning are going through a very, very difficult time in your life. And I don't know you, a lot of you, I don't know your stories, but I know that there are three possibilities for every person in this room. Number one, you've just come out of a really difficult season. Number two, you are currently in a very difficult season. Or number three, you're getting ready to go into a difficult season, right? Because that's the way the world works. We live in a fallen world. We live in a world that is infected by sin, and so we have bad days. That's exactly what Jesus said. He said, in this world, you will have troubles. You will have troubles. That's a guarantee that, hey, life's going to get hard. There's going to be storms. You're going to feel like you're in the fire. You're going to have troubles. All right, because that's the world that we live in. And some of you are in a fire right now, and you're in a real struggle. And you might be, in the fire struggling for your marriage. You might be in the fire struggling for, financially, and things are really difficult. Maybe your job is like you're this close from getting laid off, and you're going to find out this week. I don't know. Whatever it is, the fire in your life, I don't know what kind of fire you're going through, but I know that you're probably going through something. Even if you're doing everything right. Sometimes we do everything right and the fire still comes. And you're like, I'm in church, I go to Bible study, I read my Bible, I pray, I love my spouse, I'm trying to do everything right, but still the fire comes. So what do we do in life when we're in the middle of the fire? I want to start, before we get to Daniel and his friends, I want to start by reading something out of 1 Peter chapter 1, verses 6 through 7. I think this really sets the stage for where we're going this morning. Peter says this. He says, so be truly glad. He's talking about struggles. So be truly glad. There is a wonderful joy ahead, even though you must endure many trials for a little while. What he's saying, hey, there's a wonderful joy ahead because one day, if you know Jesus, we're going to die and we're going to be with him forever. And then we're not going to have to worry about all the junk that goes on in the world, in our lives. But he says, you must endure trials for a little while. Life's short. When you think about eternity, life's really short. He says, these trials will show that your faith is genuine. And it is being tested as fire tests and purifies gold. Though your faith is far more precious than mere gold. So when your faith remain strong through many trials, it will bring much praise and glory and honor on the day when Jesus Christ is revealed to the whole world. So when your faith stays strong through the trials and fire, they tend to reveal the level of your faith, right? You really don't know what kind of faith you have until you're in a situation where the only thing you have is God, right? You don't know, do I have strong faith? Do I have weak faith? You're not going to know until you go through the fire. And that's when you're going to realize what it is. And so when you're in a trial, when you're in a struggle, your faith can actually grow in a trial. Remember I said there's two kinds of people. There's those that give up and there's those that get up. So your faith, when you encounter a trial, when you're coming into a fire, you can give up and let the enemy believe he's won, or you can get up and your faith can actually be strengthened in the fire. Because what the enemy means for evil, God can use for good, right? What the enemy means for evil, God can use for good. Now, you may never get to see that good. That's where I'm talking faith. Like, I can say that and you're like, well, I don't see what good is going to come out of this. You might find out in a year. You might find out in 20 years. You might die and never see how God could actually take something so bad and work it into so good. But I promise you that he is still good. We just sang that. You are good. You are good. So God is still good. And I truly believe what's going on in Daniel chapter 3 is going to be life-changing for a lot of us in here, because it's really changed me this week. I've spent a lot of time this week studying this passage and had a lot of personal convictions out of this. And so it rocked my world. And so I think this is going to speak to you, because it's a story of 3 teenage boys whose faith is literally tested by the fire. And this is one of the most well-known stories in the Bible. If you've ever stepped foot in church, even if you haven't, you might have heard the story, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego in the fiery furnace. And here's what's going on, just to catch you up in case you weren't here last week. King Nebuchadnezzar, who is the evil king of Babylon, they go in and he captures Daniel and his friends in chapter 1. And in this chapter, a little bit before where we're going to start in, King Nebuchadnezzar had built a statue that was 90 feet tall and it was 9 feet wide. And he wanted everyone to worship this gold statue he built. Now, just fun fact for you, Nebuchadnezzar is actually Saddam Hussein. Nebuchadnezzar was his hero. Right? So Saddam Hussein wanted his life to look a lot like Nebuchadnezzar, which makes a lot of sense because Nebuchadnezzar was evil, Saddam Hussein was evil. So that was his role model, just to kind of fill you in on how bad this guy really was. And so what the king did is he set up a statue and he said, okay, here's the deal. Every time you hear music play, you need to stop wherever you are and you need to bow and you need to worship in the direction of the statue I've set up. So if you're at work or school, you're just at home chilling, if you're in the bathroom, gonna get awkward, but you need to stop, bow down, and you need to worship the statue that I've built up. And so, of course, if someone doesn't bow, you're gonna be killed, right? That's the penalty. You either worship or you die and you're gonna be thrown into a furnace. Now, remember last week, Daniel and his friends had impressed the king. And the king had put them in positions of authority throughout the government. And some of the Babylonians didn't like that, right? They didn't like that these foreigners, that these outsiders were coming into their country and having positions of authority. So they noticed that these 3 guys, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, they did not bow down and worship the image when the music played. And so they went to the king, Nebuchadnezzar, and they said, okay, hey, first of all, king, you're amazing. Your statue, it's giant. It's golden, it catches the eye, but we wanted to let you know that there's 3 guys who you appointed, in our government that did not bow down and worship the statue. And we're just keeping you accountable, but you said anybody who doesn't, they're going to be thrown into a furnace. So we're letting you know that these guys didn't do that. All right, that's where we pick up, and we're going to start in verse 13. If you have your Bibles, we're going to be in Daniel chapter 3, verse 13. And if you don't, it'll be up on the screen for you to follow along. It says, then in a furious rage, Nebuchadnezzar gave orders to bring in Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. And so these men were brought before the king. And Nebuchadnezzar asked them, well, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, is it true that you don't serve my gods or worship the gold statue that I've set up? Well, now, if you're ready, when you hear the sound of the horn, the flute, the zither, the lyre, the harp, the drum, and every kind of music, fall down and worship the statue that I've made. But if you don't worship it, you will be immediately thrown into a furnace of blazing fire. And who is the God that can rescue you from my power?" Now, I don't know why the king did it. I don't know why he's given these guys a second chance, because Nebuchadnezzar was not known to be merciful. So maybe he thought, well, I'm going to give them the benefit of the doubt. Maybe they didn't hear the music, and I'm going to give them another chance. Maybe he thought, well, these Babylonian guys, they probably don't like them. They're trying to set him up, so I want to get the whole story here. Maybe the king just really genuinely liked these guys, and he's like, I really don't want to throw you in a furnace, so come on, you got to follow the law and do this. But whatever the reason, he was giving them another shot to do this. And then he asks a question that's really key to the entire situation that we're reading about. Here's what he asks. He says, "And who is the God who can rescue you from my power?" Who's the God that can rescue you from my power? And the answer that these three 15 or 16-year-old boys give is one of the greatest, most bold, most powerful responses that you're going to find in the entire Bible, right? Here's what they say in verse 16. "Well, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego replied to the king, 'Nebuchadnezzar, we don't need to give you an answer to this question.'" Right? That's bold, right? You had 16-year-olds standing before the most powerful man in the world, one of the most evil guys in the world, and they say, well, actually, we don't even need to give you a response. You know where we stand. You know what we believe. They didn't need time to think about it. They didn't say, well, let us go have a group huddle. We'll come to our decision and come back. They didn't need any of that because they had already made, like we talked about last week, a predetermined decision that they would not compromise what they believed to be right. No matter what the cost was, even if the cost was their own life, they were not willing to compromise. Do you see a lot of teenagers like that today? Well, do you see a lot of adults like that today? I mean, this is amazing that these teenage boys are standing up like, hey, we know that a furnace is waiting for us if we don't do this, but we're not going to compromise. We're not going to compromise because they had already made a decision. They all knew that if they were ever to face a situation like this, they knew what their answer was going to be. They're going to follow God no matter what. And so I want you to think this. I was thinking this weekend. Imagine if you were one of these three boys. Like, put yourself in their shoes, and you're standing before the king, and he's like, you either bow or you die. And I'd like to say, if that were me, I'd be really pastoral and be like, I stand for what I believe. Like, I will not compromise. I'd like to say that I'd have the faith of a 15-year-old, but the truth is, I think I might try to justify. I think I might try to say, look, everybody else is bowing, so I'm just going to bow externally, but on the inside, I'm standing up, right? Or maybe, you'd be like, well, I'm just going to bow and I'm going to worship it, and then I'm going to feel really guilty and ask for forgiveness, and then the next day it's like this cycle. A lot of us have that with sin in our life, that we like, well, I'm going to do this. I know it's wrong. I'm going to ask for forgiveness, then I'm going to do the same thing tomorrow. Like, I might have tried to justify it like that, saying, oh, I really don't want to die, because being thrown in a fiery furnace, like, that's a bad day. Like, you might think your day's bad, unless someone's threatening you to say, Bob, I'm going to throw you in a furnace if you don't do this. Like, this is a bad day. This is a big decision that they're up against. But they didn't compromise. They had made a predetermined decision to follow God regardless of what the outcome would be. And I promise you, if you're a follower of Jesus in any capacity, then you're going to face countless opportunities to compromise what you know is right. Because that's the world we live in, right? There's compromising decisions you could make every single day, because when life gets hard, it would be easier to blend in than to stand out. Because when you're up against the worst that this world and our enemy can throw at you, here's what you need to remember. Your faith is found in the fire. Your faith is found in the fire. Because you don't know what kind of faith you have until you're against a situation that seems unbeatable and impossible and completely and utterly hopeless. And your only hope by getting through this is to say, okay, God, you are good. you are good because nothing else in this world is. Right? I can't get over this addiction in my life. I'm a failure, every time I walk out the door. My relationships are falling apart. This world is horrible. So God, in the midst of this horrible world that is completely messed up by sin, God, you are good. You are still good in my life. I want you to listen to what these three teenage boys say. And this is hands down one of my favorite things in the Bible. They say in verse 17, King Nebuchadnezzar, if the God we serve exists, then he can rescue us from the furnace of blazing fire. And he can rescue us from the power of you, the king. They said, Nebuchadnezzar, we're not going to bow because we believe that even if you throw us in the fire, our God, the one true God, the only God, he can rescue us and he can save us from the fire and he can save us from you. In the face of certain death, they never doubted what God could do. But here's, I think, the most important part about what they said. And this is the verse that's really rocked my world this week. It's in verse 18. But even if he does not, he said, even if he does not rescue us, then we want you to know, O king, that we will not serve your gods, that we will not bow down to the gold statue that you have set up. They said, our God can do this. It's not a matter of, is God capable of saving us? Because they knew that he could. But they said, it's not a matter of if he can, but even if he doesn't, even if God, who is able to do this, I mean, my goodness, God breathed stars in the universe into creation, right? You'd think, this is easy for God. God can do this. God can save them. And so they said, even though God can, we know he's able, even if he doesn't, it's not going to change what we believe. It's not going to change anything, O king. You can put us to death, you can throw us in the fire, but our faith in God will not be shaken. Come on, I think some of us need to really hear what's happening here. Because when you wake up in the morning and all you see are problems all around you, and when you're surrounded by fire, you can have faith that even in your pain, God has a plan. Even in your pain, God has a plan. Does it mean God made this happen? All right, that's the age-old question. If God's so good, why do bad things happen? Does this mean that God just doesn't care? Does it mean that God's not real? Does it mean God's apathetic? Maybe he's busy. I'm sitting on the line on hold. What's going on here? See, we live in a world that's messed up because of sin. God doesn't make bad things happen. All right, that's the enemy. All right, that's Satan, that's sin. But God can still use the worst that the enemy has for good. Again, we might never get to know what that good is. We might never get to see the results of the pain and the suffering in our life. But one thing I do know is that you are good. You are good. God's still good. See, we're people who believe that God is capable of coming through in any situation. But we're also people of faith that can say, even if he doesn't, we're still going to follow him. See, that's faith, which is knowing no matter what happens, we're going to follow Jesus to the end. That it ultimately doesn't matter if it turned out the way that we want. It doesn't matter if God responded in the way that we thought that he should. Our faith is forged in the fire. Maybe somebody got that call this week, from the doctor and said, hey, you've got a disease that's incurable. Maybe someone this week got, they're looking at you're looking at your bank account and you're like, I can either keep my lights on or I can either get food for my kids, but I can't do both. Maybe someone you love is lying on their deathbed and nothing short of a miracle act of God could save them. Maybe your marriage looks like it's over. Look, I don't know your situation. I know that there's a lot of people in here that are hurting. I know there's a lot of people in here that are in pain. And again, if you're not in pain now, it's coming. Right? You don't wait till a hurricane happens to board up the windows. Now you do it ahead of time. And so if you don't build your faith on a foundation of Christ, when that storm comes, when that fire enters your life, you're not going to be ready, and it's going to absolutely wreck you. So you need to do everything it takes to build up that faith now. That way, when you enter the fire, your faith can actually be strengthened through the trial. It can be strengthened. God can rescue us from any and every situation, but even if he doesn't, you be obedient and you let God take care of the outcome. You be obedient. That's the only thing you've got to worry about. You be obedient and God will worry about the outcome. You know, I wear glasses. I put contacts in sometimes. My wife says I look horrible if I'm not in glasses, so praise God I have glasses. You do say that. Anyway. So she really likes these glasses. And so anyway, I wear glasses because I have terrible eyesight. I mean, if I don't have glasses on, even Craig looks good, right? Like, I can't, boom, that's good. When I have my glasses on, everything's blurry, everything's kind of distorted, like I can't see, I can't drive, I can't read what's on the TV back there, I can't see. And so I don't know how glasses work, but somehow the thickness of the glass and the lens, it corrects whatever mess up in my eye. And so when I put glasses on, I can see. And the thing about glasses is I don't just put them on once. I'm like, I can see well, I don't need glasses again, right? No, that's not how glasses work. That would be LASIK. There you go, Bob. Bob did that. But for me, I have to put on glasses. So every night when I go to bed, I take my glasses off, put them on my bedside table, and every morning when I wake up, guess what? My vision is messed up, and I've got to put my glasses back on so that I can see clearly again. And I think faith is a lot like putting on glasses. Because if you look at problems without the lens of faith, then all you're going to see is pain. If you look at your problems, if you look at your trials, if you look at your current fire that you're in without the lens of faith, everything's distorted and you're going to start to question, like, how is God in this? If God is so good, how is he in this? Because you're not putting on the lens of faith. You're not viewing your problem through the lens of faith. But all of a sudden, if you can make the decision every morning when you get up, just like I need to see clearly, but every morning when I wake up, I'm going to put on the lens of faith, that's going to allow me to see my problems clearly. It will allow me to see Jesus even in the worst situation that the world can throw at me, right? Faith that says, God, your plan is greater than my plan. God, your way is greater than my way. I don't have to understand what you're doing to still acknowledge that you are good. It's faith that says, I will follow Jesus even if he doesn't do what I wanted him to do. I will follow Jesus even if he doesn't do what I wanted him to do. And you know what? I think Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego knew this. And I think living in their current situation, I mean, a lot of us haven't been sold into slavery. A lot of us haven't had to live in Babylon under an evil king and try to be forced to worship false gods. But these kids did. These kids were subject to that. And every day they had to put on the lens of faith because it's difficult to see God when you're in a situation like that. Amen? It's difficult to see how's God working in this worst moment of my life. And because of that, because they were willing to put on the lens of faith, they were willing to stand for what they believed, whether that meant living or dying. Now, these 3 teenage boys didn't know what was going to happen. Like spoiler alert, they live, but we know that they're going to make it, like God's going to come through, and that's awesome. They didn't know that. They were making this final stand like, okay, we're going to die. God can't save us, but, I mean, will he really? And so they, in their minds, were like, okay, we're getting ready to be burned to death. And this is going to be the worst day ever. But they still stood up for what they believed, and they were unwavering despite the oncoming fire. And here's what happened. The king was so furious that he took the furnace, and he was so mad these kids stood up to him that he said, I want to heat it up to 7 times what it normally is. So I don't want there to be any chances. Like, I don't want them mostly dead. I want them all the way dead, like fried chicken burnt. So he said, get it really hot. And then the guards, he said, I want my best people, tie their hands, leave their clothes on, dump some gasoline or whatever on them. Like, let's make sure they're really flammable. And he said, okay, now throw them in the furnace while I watch. So these guards take these guys, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, bound up. They take them up there. They throw them into the furnace. And it's so hot that the guards who threw them in, they died because that's how hot the fire was. Right? So this is an impossible situation. And here's what happens in verse 24. It says, then King Nebuchadnezzar jumped up in alarm and he said to his advisors, didn't we throw 3 men bound into the fire? Yes, of course, your majesty, they replied to the king. And he exclaimed, look, I see 4 men not tied walking around in the fire unharmed. And the 4th looks like a son of the gods. Now we know who that is. We know that's Jesus right there. That's Jesus showing up in this impossible situation to rescue them. Now listen, I want to make something very, very clear. Just because you're a Christian does not mean bad things will never happen. If that's the Christianity you've been sold, I'm sorry, that's just simply not true. The point of this story isn't to make you a promise that God will rescue you from the fire, because sometimes the things we're praying for simply don't happen. Sometimes God doesn't do what we asked him to do. This week, it was on August 17th, it was 2 years since my grandpa passed away. And so he had cancer for several years, and I prayed for him a lot. In fact, the summer he passed away, we spent a lot of time going there, and I spent a lot of time praying over him. And so I thought, okay, God, if you're going to hear anyone's prayers, like, I'm a pastor, so like maybe that gives me a little extra like credit or something that I'd like to cash in right now. And I had my wife praying for him, and so we prayed, like, we prayed hard. I don't even know what that means, but we prayed hard. And so as we were praying, he continued to wither away. And so I was like, God, okay, it would be awesome if you just did a miracle right now. Like, you want people to know who you are? Okay, you can heal him. You can get rid of the cancer. Like, God, what would be even better than him dying to go and be with you is for you to heal him, because think of how many people will come to know you because of that. Like, that's a miracle. And so we kept praying, and he didn't get better, and he ended up losing his life. And I was very confused for a while, because I thought, well, I prayed for this for so long that I thought me and God had a little bit better relationship than that. I'll just say, I kind of felt like God owed me, which is not right. I'll just throw that out there. Again, I said I'm not perfect, but I kind of felt like God, you kind of owe me this. Like, I've left my family. I've started a church. We've been hungry. Like, this is, God, I really need you to do this. And he didn't do it. And that's where I think this story really began to work in my life, because we all want the impossible situation to happen. We all want the story of like, well, they're okay. God came in. He rescued them. But sometimes that doesn't happen. And so their response of, even if he doesn't, we're still going to follow him. And that's why when I lost my greatest friend in the entire world, my faith wasn't rocked, because I knew it's better to go on to be with Jesus. Paul says that. For to live is Christ, to die is gain. Like, here I get to worship Jesus, on the planet Earth, but it'd be much better just to go be with him. The point of the story isn't to make you a promise that God will rescue you from the fire. The point of the story is to help you see that our God is willing to step into the fire. That means that if you're going through a loss, you're not going through it alone. If you're hurting, you're not hurting alone. You are not alone. Jesus is hurting with you. God doesn't make bad things happen. But God is so good that somehow he can use what the enemy meant for evil for his glory. The enemy doesn't want you to know this. He wants you to think that when bad things happen, it means that God doesn't care, but that's not true. See, God didn't just save them from the fire by speaking, which he could have. Again, creates planets just by breathing. He could have just spoken and said, let them be saved. Whatever he does, I don't know. But he didn't do that. He entered the fire with them. He was in their presence. And the truth is, sometimes we feel God's presence the greatest when life is at its worst. Sometimes we feel God's presence the greatest when life is at its worst. Because when everything is going good, when all the bills are paid, when we're actually not fighting with our spouse, when our kids go to bed when they're supposed to, like when life is good, we don't really recognize how much we need God. But sometimes it takes a fire to fuel our faith. It takes a fire to fuel our faith. Sometimes it takes an impossible situation for us to finally recognize our need, to stop trying to do it on our own, to say, okay, Jesus, now I've done everything I can. I've exhausted all my options. Now, Jesus, it's got to be you. Because I am at the point of no return. Now I need you. It would be way easier if we just started that way. Instead of trying to do it on our own, if we just said, okay, God, I give this to you. But we don't do that. We try to do everything on our own. And then we're like, okay, that didn't work. Jesus. Sometimes it takes a fire to fuel our faith. That doesn't mean that God caused the pain in your life, but it does mean that God can use the pain in your life. The enemy wants the fire to destroy your faith. But the reality is your faith is found in the fire, and your faith is forged by the fire. I want to wrap up this morning by telling you something that James said in chapter 1, verse 2. He said, dear brothers and sisters, when troubles of any kind come your way, consider it an opportunity for great joy. For you know that when your faith is tested, your endurance has a chance to grow. That's weird, right? Because none of us would say, oh, good, a season of fire's coming. It's gonna be, I can't wait to grow. This is gonna be good. Like some of you weirdos who love going to the gym. Oh, I'm gonna tear up my muscles. It's gonna be awesome. Like that's weird. In the same way, when we're facing a struggle or trial, we're like, oh, cool, I get to grow now. That's not the way it happens. But he says, consider it an opportunity for great joy. When your life's falling apart, be happy. Be happy. For you know that when your faith is tested, you know that when you're in the fire, your endurance has a chance to grow. Because your faith is found in the fire. So whatever it is you're facing, don't let the enemy win. But instead, put on the lens of faith and you will begin to see Jesus even in the worst, darkest thing that this world and enemy has to throw your way. Put on the lens of faith. Do not let the enemy win. Would you bow your heads this morning? And as we are praying, I just want you to think about that fire that you're currently in or that you've come out of. I want you to think about whatever it is that has your faith a little bit shaken and rocked. And there's normally one thing we pray. God, do this. God, I need this. God, rescue me from the fire. And maybe that's been your prayer for like a week or 2 years, 10 years. Some of you have been praying for your kids for a long, long time. And you're like, God, I need like a fire furnace miracle to happen in my life. And I've been asking you for a long time to do this. God, my marriage, it's falling apart. I keep asking you to restore it. This morning, I would ask that you change your prayer a little bit. That you would say, God, don't necessarily rescue me from the fire, but deliver me through the fire. Walk with me. God, I believe that you can pull me out of this fiery furnace, but even if you don't, God, even if you don't save my best friend, even if my marriage falls apart, or my kids never talk to me again, even if you don't do what I'm asking you to do, I'm still going to follow you. Use this fire in my life to give me a newfound faith in you. I'd like you to take a moment and pray. And just ask God to show you what he's trying to teach you. Father, you are truly good. And And that's made evident. The worse the world gets, the more good you become. So Father, thank you for loving us. God, thank you for sending your son, Jesus Christ, to give his life for mine. I certainly don't deserve it. God, if there's anyone in here whose faith is hanging by a thread, God, would you just break in? God, would you just let them see that you desperately love them? That you don't work things together for bad, but God, you give us hope. You give us a future. God, when the world is like shifting sand, you are a rock. Father, thank you for who you are. Thank you for what you're doing in our lives. Thank you, Father, in Jesus' name, and all God's people said. I love the end of their story, that Jesus entered the fire with them. And we know that whatever fire we're in, that Jesus is in it with us. And I don't know about you, but it gives me a great deal of strength to know that, man, when I'm going through the worst that the world has to offer, that Jesus is right there with me. Because maybe you think, oh, God's just in heaven and he's happy and everything's good, and what does he know about suffering? Well, he actually knows everything about suffering, because he sent Jesus here to die. Now, maybe you've never understood that, but God sent his own son to die a horrible, excruciating death. Why? Because he loves us. Because while we were still in our sin, while we were still running for him, that's when Jesus came. All right? It's not this beautiful little picture, Jesus on the cross, everything looks happy. I mean, he went through a great deal of suffering for you and for me, but still he could count that as a great joy because he loves us. And so don't think that God can't identify with your pain. God absolutely identifies. In fact, when Jesus gave his life, it says that the world was covered in darkness and the veil was torn from top to bottom. That's when Jesus took your sins upon himself. That's the gospel. I mean, that's good news. That's why we're here this morning. If Jesus never gave his life, if Jesus never rose, then we wouldn't be sitting here. But because of what he's done, we have great hope for an amazing future. And maybe some of you are experiencing the fire, but you don't know where to turn because you really don't know Jesus. Like, you know about Jesus, you know about God, but he's never been the first place in your life. You've never given him that position of lordship. But you need to know that he entered the fire. He entered this world to give his life for you. And this morning, maybe you walked in this room spiritually dead and completely and utterly hopeless because the world's got you beat. Maybe you've come in feeling destroyed. Maybe you feel defeated. But this morning, Jesus can make you new. He's the only hope that we have in a dark world. So this morning, would you please stand to your feet? We're going to have a time of invitation. And if that's you, if you're saying, man, I don't know Jesus in that way, I need to follow him. Maybe you came in here spiritually dead, but you can leave spiritually resurrected and alive because what Jesus has done. And that doesn't take walking down an aisle and talking to me. You certainly can. I would love to talk with you and pray with you. But right where you are, you can make that decision that I need to follow Jesus. Or maybe, again, you're one of those that you're in a storm. You can tell a storm's coming your way and the fire's all around you. Maybe today you just need to cry out during this invitation. God, I need a little bit of faith. I need a little bit of faith in my life. God, allow my faith to grow in the fire.